Okay, are we ready? Thanks very much. Oh my God, what's that? Could that be a recession? Oh, no. That gentleman has his own definition, by the way. But I know that you've been really worried about a recession because you've been searching on Google desperately to find out what a recession actually is. And so you did a whole bunch of searching back there in 2008 when the recession was actually occurring. And there's a big spike in searching in August of 2019, maybe an early warning sign that a recession is actually going to occur. But I want to deal with the anxiety by offering answers to your difficult questions. The first question is, what's a recession anyway? The second is, who should care about it? Who should worry about it? And finally, is a recession coming soon? And so I just want you to keep calm while we continue to go through the difficult material. Everything will be all right, I promise you. Question one, what's a recession? So if you go to the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, they'll talk about 2 negative quarters of GDP growth. That's a sometimes symptom of a recession. I think more appropriate to talk about a recession is the period of time when markets are going awry, letting sharp increases in unwanted idleness of capital, labor, and land. Or for example, in the case of labor, it's a spike up in the unemployment rate. And just to show you that it's 2 negative quarters doesn't really work. So this is a GDP growth, and the bar's pointing down in that 2001 downturn. There were no 2 negative quarters, yet the official recession determined by a group of economists at the National Bureau of Economic Research, they said that was a recession. And then they kind of included 1 quarter that maybe they didn't need to there. And over here, it's kind of weird where you had a big positive in the middle of what they called a recession. Anyway, GDP is not a perfect way of defining what a recession is. But if you want to find out what a recession is, you give your 5-year-old an image of the unemployment and let the 5-year-old color in the mountain slopes facing in the westerly direction, which is this image here. So the mountains are actually the unemployment rate, and the 5-year-old is, like I said, colored the mountain slopes, the steep slopes facing in the westerly direction. Those are the official recessions. So the NBR crew has more or less ratified the view that a recession is a period of time of unwanted increases in idleness of workers and capital as well, and land too. So that's what a recession is. Question 2, who should worry about a recession? And the answer is everybody. For some of you, it'll create opportunities, investment opportunities. For other of you have yourself or your family member at risk of revenue loss. And you need to do a stress test now, while that recession is still far enough into the future, to decide whether you have a portfolio mix which is appropriate to your risk on a revenue side when that recession actually occurs. You need to do a kind of personal stress test. And I'll give you a few steps in that direction right here to kick it off. First, I'm going to show you what is a recession. What does it come with? A recession comes with diminished earnings of workers and owners and governments as well. Tax revenues are falling. It also comes with diminished values of assets. And that's equities and homes and used automobiles. A recession is a bad time to sell your used car because you're not going to get a fair price. But everybody else is trying to get rid of their used cars to deal with the fact that they've got debt problems. So a recession is a period of elevated bad debt. Bad debt means that you don't have the cash flow to do the interest service, and asset prices are falling so low you can't sell off assets to retire the debt. The result is you have this bad debt problem, and that comes with delinquencies, defaults, bankruptcies, which are hard on both lender and borrower. A kind of a protracted negotiation about who's going to suffer the losses that actually occurred in that recession. So leverage is great early in expansion. So leverage means borrowing to acquire assets. If these are wisely chosen assets that increase in value and that have revenues flowing out of them that help doing the debt service, that's a terrific time to do leverage investment. But late in expansion, leverage is a terrible thing because it's going to get you into default delinquency risk. So you need to organize your personal portfolio, particularly those of you who have jobs at risk in the recession, to back off the leverage now rather than entering the recession in heavy leverage situation where your personal cash flows are going to be weak. In addition, the idea of moving more into cash at this point is a good idea because that cash is going to allow you to buy distressed debt or distressed equities at low prices. That's my little picture of cash in your portfolio, hopefully. So here's an image that shows you the overall decline in revenues in recessions. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at what these expansions look like. And all the expansions like that one in 1948 Q4 are going to end up at the very top where that the vertical bar indicates the peak. To the left are the quarters before the peak. So this is going to show you growth in the expansion. And the peak, when you hit it, then you're going to have a decline in GDP, just like what happened in 1948 Q4. And this is the 1953 Q2. If you want to see how much growth there was in that episode, move over to the left-hand side and see the scale is about 23% or something like that. So you had a lot of growth in GDP in that expansion. So I'm using this for two purposes. One is to show you that there is a across-the-board decline in revenues in these recessions. But secondly, we're going to look at the last 4 quarters to see whether there's any symptoms in this chart of the recession to come. Anyway, that was 53, 57, 60, 69, 73. I'm sure getting them all in here. That's 90, that's 2001. The Bush-Clinton expansion, which is the biggest one, longest one to date. That's the 2001, and this is us currently. You can see that if you go to the beginning of this current one, we're now in the 41st quarter, setting a record for the oldest expansion ever. And frankly, the idea that age comes with approaching debt is something I find personally offensive. But, but we're going to have to look at the data to decide whether that's real or not. And so humans may be a little different from expansions in terms of the death risk late in life. But then you're supposed to be looking at the last 4 quarters. We're going to look at other images like this. And it's really hard to see any symptoms of the recession to come in the GDP data. Maybe a little tiny bit of slowing, but that's not where we're going to look for news that the next recession is coming. But we're going to look in those 4 quarters before the recession began. Okay, so then to dig a little deeper into your personal stress test, it matters what your job is, and it matters what job your family members have. So we're going to look at a bunch of these different jobs. These are the same set of jobs that Jerry was referring to a minute ago. And I'll use the word CONS to mean consumption, or I'm sorry, construction. Yeah. And MAN-M is durable manufacturing, et cetera. And we're going to look, the mnemonics are pretty clear. But if you don't see it, make a visual snapshot and keep this in your head. So we're now going to look at what happened in the expansions from 2001 M12. That's the horizontal axis. That's the 11th expansion. We're in the 12th now since 1947. The 11th one began in 2001 and ended in 2008, where that recession occurred. The horizontal axis is the percent change in payrolls at an annualized rate in that expansion, and the vertical axis is the percent change in the following recession, the recession that occurred began in 2008, January 2008. So what you want to be is in the recession-proof jobs, which are up in the upper right, which are jobs that are growing during the expansion and still growing in the recession. The jobs that are the biggest risk ones, the biggest concerning ones, are the ones on the lower left, which have job losses both in that expansion and in the recession. That's durable manufacturing and non-durable manufacturing. And also information, oddly enough. So information is movies, publishing, software, and we can talk later about that. But if that's your sector, you need to dig into details because all of those subsectors in the information super sector, they don't have the same experience. So what's the good job? Education, health, service. By the way, the folks up here are not in education. We're in government because we're paid by the state. So this is kind of private education, not public education there. But a government is also a good job. So if you're going to, if you're in durable manufacturing, non-durable manufacturing, you better have your spouse in education, health, or in government in order to diversify your kind of personal portfolio. The worst job is to have you both in manufacturing. And this is the previous expansion. And we can see that here mining was a really bad job. So that varies from expansion to expansion, but mining was really bad in that expansion that began in 1991. But up here on the right, we have education, health services, and government. Finance, insurance, and real estate was really good in that experience as well. So do your personal stress testing. Whoops. So this is a slide that confirms that asset prices decline in recessions, which are bad if you're heavy into equities, but great if you're in cash ready to buy equities at lower prices. So this shows you in the same kind of picture that you saw before, what's happening in equities. Oh, they're going up by as much as 70% during expansion. And about a year, maybe the middle of the year before the expansion actually ends, you tend to get a correction. That correction can be as big as 50%, like it did in 2008 and 9. That creates a huge opportunity for you who entered the recession with your cash. But if you're heavily leveraged, that decline is a killer, because you can't sell your asset to get outside, to escape the debt load that you have. This is the elevated defaults and delinquencies as measured by the risk spread on BAA bonds. So this is the yield on the BAA, which is one step above junk, minus the 10-year Treasury. And you can see early in the expansions, it tends to be steep as the banking sector worries about default and delinquencies. But as expansion goes on and default delinquencies are not too severe, or maybe not at all, then that credit spread narrows, but it spikes up enormously. That's the default delinquencies that occur in the recession, which creates a distressed debt asset, by the way, where your cash can accumulate that, or can buy that debt. Question 3, is a recession coming soon? This is really a hard question, frankly. You know, I'm a statistician. I kind of know how you make use of the data in just the right way. But here we only have 11 experiments. You had 11 expansions that ended in recessions. And there's literally thousands of macro variables that you could study. So that it's a setting that's overwhelmed by the potential for varying the model to produce different kinds of outcomes. So I want to leave you with, I'm going to end up with a number, which is my personal forecast, the probability of recession. But I'm warning you about the ease with which that number could be manipulated, and the fact that you got to be careful when you listen to the statisticians who are dishing out numbers like the one I'm going to dish out. So age is the #1 concern that most people have. We already talked about that a minute ago. So for people, this is the death rates for individuals. For young individuals, the death rates are elevated. But then they drop down when you're 4 or 5 years old, and that's the elevated hazard. That's the risk that's elevating as you get older. The question is whether expansions have that same feature. It's called a hazard rate, whether the hazard rate is constant or whether it elevates as the expansion gets older, the way it is for humans. So the way we're going to look at this is through an image that looks like this. This shows you, assuming that there's a 4% chance that the expansion dies in every quarter. This shows you the fraction of expansions that have died at any given point in time. So if you look at the number 20 there, that's 20 quarters. You go up to where that curve is, and it's about 50%. So this says about 50%. If it's a 4% risk quarter by quarter, about 50% of the expansions are going to die after 20 quarters. And there's no elevated hazard rate there. That's a curve that occurs where the hazard is exactly constant, that being older doesn't mean that the risk is higher. So on top of that, I'm going to lay the actual story of the expansions. And you can see in the middle here, that first curve pretty much captures the accumulated risk of the expansion deaths. But what's different is the expansions don't die young. So that's one phenomenon. They're designed in a way or chosen in a way that they don't die young. But there is an elevated risk when you get above 35 quarters. It does seem like the 4% is not longer applicable. So we're going to be alert to that when we build our model. We'll try to build in an aging effect that allows for, that's going to capture that potential. At the other end, we're going to knock off the first 8 quarters because that's a recovery period, and we don't want to contrast the last year with the recovery. We want to contrast the last year of the expansion with the years that immediately preceded that as a way of designing a warning. Okay? So it might be just an age effect, but it could be overbuilding where the Fed gives us these low interest rates for so long that stimulated excessive building in homes, produced high rates of appreciation, and then the Fed says we're going to stop this and jack up the interest rates and kill off the cycle. So that isn't about aging, that's about poor life management. It's like the Fed is giving us opioids. And then takes it away, and then we have a recession. And it happens they take it away when we're kind of old, but that isn't an aging effect. That's mismanagement on the part of the Fed. The other possible story, you can see that in this picture. This shows you the cumulative contribution of homes to economic growth. And these cycles are a big up and down thing where the Fed is stimulating and you're accumulating more and more output into the housing sector, and the Fed says, oh my God, we held the interest rates too low for too long, and they kill off housing. And so there's definitely evidence of this cycle. So we need to put that into our model. This time is a little different because we haven't had a huge overbuilding. Another story is overharvesting of the ideas, because when the ideas are on the tree, it's pretty easy for the entrepreneurs to run out and gather the fruit. That's low-hanging fruit. The great ideas are going to work easily. As expansion continues, the entrepreneurs are picked higher and higher in the tree. It gets harder and harder, more and more difficult. Then you have a timeout. So there's a harvesting cycle. I thought maybe the 1990 event might be similar to a setting of overharvesting, where they overharvested the internet ideas, and then you had to have a collapse in business investment and software and equipment in that 2000 downturn. So we'll try to build that in. And then these are the precursors. It's sort of like, these are like cancer diagnoses. So if you have a cancer diagnosis that is, the prognosis is bad, it doesn't matter how old you are. It ends the meaning of being old. It all depends upon that diagnosis. These are the precursors. So one precursor that's worrisome is the decline in weekly hours in manufacturing. Another one that David already mentioned is the decline in the flattening out of the yield curve. Another one is actually the flattening of the unemployment rate. That picture that David has for unemployment rate, that doesn't actually ever occur. You get down to the bottom, it looks kind of flat, and then you zoom into recession and the real data. The BAA rate is probably not suggestive of much of a problem at this point. And then the other one is the accumulated contribution of GDP. Investment in homes has been weak, which is a source of concern. So we're going to mix all this stuff together, and I'm going to do 4 different models. The first model has only the age. So it has expansion age. I'm going to measure age also by accumulated GDP and accumulated residential investment, and I'll allow for that turnaround in residential investment. So that's strictly an aging phenomenon. Model 2 has the precursors, with that other additional precursor, which is the weakness in the housing market, recent weakness in the housing market. And Model 3 adds them all together, includes them all. And in Model 4 is Model 3 with the statistically irrelevant variables omitted. And you can see that the ones that are omitted was that BAA. You kind of saw it in an image that wasn't going to work out. But also you omit the accumulated residential investment. That's not a good way to measure age if you take the statistician's view of statistical significance. So then you what I want to alert you to, these are 4 different models. The first 2, in a way, I do that to build into the last 2. So I wouldn't necessarily say the first 2 we want to rely on. But still, the first one gives you a 7% chance of recession in the next year. The next year means 2019 Q4, next quarter, all the way to 2020 Q3. That's the next year in this thing. So 7%, 17%, 0%, and 100%. That's a pretty wide range. And these are all very reasonable models. But the statisticians have a little trick, which is the fit of these models can be used to assign to them their probability, the extent to which we should depend upon them. And the fit, surprisingly, is sufficiently similar that all these probabilities are about the same. The Model 3 does a little bit better than the other ones. So if you use those weights, you get the finale, which is that there's a 32% chance of recession in this next year. The background risk is about 19, 20%. So this would say that precursors and aging add up to some greater concern, but not enough to panic, enough to give us time to do our stress test and make sure we're married to the right person, so we'll be able to. And then, so be prepared. Failure to prepare is preparing to fail. And don't forget about cash. Thank you very much.